Comrades, awaken. The world you inhabit is not a neutral stage upon which the play of life unfolds. It is a battlefield forged by the relentless hands of those who grasp power and maintained by the ignorance of those who endure it. You have been trained to see society as an eternal, unchangeable order, as if the division between the powerful and the powerless were the law of nature itself. But history teaches us otherwise. History favors not the passive, not the submissive, but those who understand the mechanisms of power, the economic, political, and ideological forces that shape life itself. Consider the world you inhabit. Every law, every custom, every freedom you believe you possess is not the fruit of your labor or the benevolence of rulers. It is a construction, a tool wielded by the ruling class to maintain dominance. Capitalist society, with its glittering commodities and illusions of equality, conceals the truth. Your labor is stolen from you. Each hour you toil, each drop of sweat you shed, enriches not yourself but the masters who control the means of production. You do not produce for society, for justice, or for your own advancement. You produce to perpetuate your own subjugation. Look closely at the machinery of oppression. Wages, markets, and freedom of contract are nothing but chains disguised as opportunities. You labor, yet you remain alienated from your work, from its products, from your fellow workers, and even from your own humanity. While you build houses, wealth, and empires, the fruits of your labor are wrenched from your hands and concentrated in the coffers of the few. This is not a natural order. It is a historical creation, sustained by ideology, by culture, and by the very ignorance imposed upon you. The ruling class does not merely command armies or accumulate gold, it commands minds. It teaches you to see your oppression as your destiny, to accept scarcity as virtue, and to fight amongst yourselves rather than at the gates of power, where your true strength lies. Yet, the story of history is not merely one of domination. History is a chronicle of struggle, of resistance, of the oppressed rising to claim what has always been theirs. The rise of revolutions, the fall of tyrannies, the overturning of oppressive systems all confirm a single truth. Those who comprehend power, who understand the structures that bind them, can change the course of society. The working class, the majority who create all wealth yet own nothing, are the latent architects of a new world. But comprehension alone is not enough. Knowledge of oppression must transform into unity, and unity must transform into action. Workers of every industry, of every nation, recognize this. Your labor is the foundation of all power. To seize it, to organize collectively, to strike against exploitation, is to awaken the latent force within yourselves and to redirect the currents of history. Class consciousness, the recognition that your suffering is not individual but systemic, is the spark that ignites revolution. When the many recognize their collective power against the few who dominate, the structures of exploitation tremble. History does not favor the naive, the quiet, or the obedient. It favors the informed, the united, and the resolute. But understand this, comrades, the struggle is neither abstract nor optional. Capitalism does not negotiate, it devours. Every concession it offers is a strategy to delay your awakening, to maintain division, and to perpetuate inequality. The oppressors understand the science of power. They shape ideology, culture, and law to their advantage. If you wish to seize your destiny, you must study the conditions of society as rigorously as they exploit them. Only by knowing the levers of economic, political, and social control can you disassemble the machinery of oppression and rebuild it in the interest of the many rather than the few. The path is clear. Reject the illusions that chain your mind. Recognize the structures that enforce your subjugation. Unite with your fellow laborers, for divided you are powerless, but united you are unstoppable. Organize, act, and claim what is rightfully yours, the wealth your labor has created, the dignity you have been denied, and the society that has yet to be built. Those who understand power bend history to their will. Those who do not are swept aside by it. Comprehension without action is meaningless, and action without organization is futile. History, comrades, waits for no one, but it will bend to the will of those who seize it with clarity, courage, and unity. The hour of awakening is now. The hour of action is upon you. Seize your understanding, seize your power, and in doing so, seize history itself. Power is not a gift bestowed by fate, nor is it the natural consequence of human ability or moral worth. To believe otherwise is to accept the illusions carefully constructed by those who dominate society, for they depend upon the masses perceiving the world as inevitable, unchangeable, and ordered by the whims of nature, rather than the deliberate design of human institutions. The structures that govern life, the laws, the governments, the markets, the culture, the very rules of common sense, are all expressions of power wielded by the ruling class, whose primary interest is to maintain its wealth, its privileges, and its control over the labor of others. This power is neither abstract nor amorphous. It is deeply material, rooted in the ownership of the means of production. Factories, land, raw materials, machinery, and capital are not mere tools of commerce, they are instruments of domination. The ownership of these instruments allows the few to dictate the terms of life for the many. Those who possess them define the value of labor, the conditions of work, and the distribution of society's wealth, shaping reality to ensure that the existing hierarchy remains unchallenged. Those who do not own, who must sell their labor to survive, are constrained by the structures erected by the owners. These structures operate not only through force or coercion, but also through ideology. The ruling class embeds its interests in every aspect of culture, education, law, and morality, presenting the social order as natural, inevitable, and just. Laws protect property and capital above all else, while social norms teach obedience, competition, and individualism, diverting attention from collective oppression. The media, literature, religion, and political rhetoric become instruments for reinforcing the dominance of those who control the economy, instructing the masses to accept inequality as the natural order of things. Children are raised to believe that ambition within the existing system is virtue, that compliance with hierarchy is honorable, and that questioning authority is dangerous. Education, instead of illuminating the mechanisms of exploitation, often conceals them, creating a population that is skilled, disciplined, and productive, yet politically and economically powerless. Through this systematic shaping of consciousness, the few secure the obedience of the many without resorting to constant physical coercion, for control over thought is the most effective form of domination. The material and ideological dimensions of power are intertwined. Ownership of the means of production allows the ruling class to define society's priorities, what is produced, how labor is organized, which regions prosper, and which are neglected. The worker does not choose these conditions. The worker's labor is directed, timed, and quantified according to the needs of capital, not the needs of the laborer. When laborers produce goods, they are alienated from the results, which are appropriated by the owners to generate profit. The worker invests life, skill, and creativity into the world, yet the fruits of this effort are denied to them. Meanwhile, the ruling class uses wealth to influence political decisions, finance, ideological apparatuses, and secure structural advantages that perpetuate inequality. The state itself, presented as an impartial arbiter of justice, functions to protect private property and suppress challenges to the existing distribution of power. Institutions that appear neutral, courts, police, bureaucracy, serve the material interests of those who control the economy, reinforcing the idea that power is natural when in fact it is deliberately structured. To understand power, one must see through this veneer of inevitability and recognize its origins in economic relations. Capitalism is not an accidental arrangement. It is a historically specific system designed to concentrate wealth and authority in the hands of a few while obliging the majority to sell their labor to survive. The structures that govern society, the hierarchies of employment, the division of labor, the accumulation of capital are not eternal, but the result of historical struggle and conquest. They can be understood, analyzed, and ultimately transformed. The ruling class relies upon ignorance and disunity among the oppressed to maintain its supremacy, knowing that fragmented awareness prevents collective challenge. The more the masses accept the social order as natural, the more deeply entrenched it becomes. The fewer who comprehend the mechanisms of exploitation, the more secure the dominance of the owners. History, therefore, is not the movement of abstract forces, but the product of human relations mediated through power. Those who dominate society understand the connection between wealth and authority, labor and profit, ideology and consent. Those who do not remain trapped in a system that serves the few at the expense of the many, believing themselves free while their lives are dictated by structures designed to maintain inequality. To challenge the ruling class, one must first understand that power is structured, that it is created and sustained through economic and social relations, that nothing about the current hierarchy is predetermined or natural. Only through this comprehension can the oppressed begin to organize, to unify, and to reclaim the instruments of society for the benefit of all rather than the enrichment of a few. Workers are alienated. This is not a metaphor, nor a passing inconvenience. It is the fundamental condition imposed upon the majority under capitalist society. Labor, the very activity that sustains life and builds civilization, has been transformed into a mechanism of exploitation, a tool for the enrichment of those who own the means of production. From the moment a worker enters the factory, the field, or the workshop, their activity is no longer an expression of their own creativity, intelligence, or needs. It is directed, measured, and valued according to the interests of the capitalist, whose goal is profit rather than human fulfillment. The worker does not labor for self-realization, but for survival, producing goods and wealth that they will never fully enjoy, while their own time, energy and capacities are consumed by the demands of a system designed to extract the maximum value from their efforts. The laborer becomes a cog, a replaceable instrument, stripped of agency and subjected to rhythms, tasks, and objectives determined by those who control society. This exploitation produces a profound separation from the products of one's labor. The worker invests life, skill, and ingenuity into creating objects, services, and wealth, yet the results are appropriated by the capitalist, transformed into commodities, and sold for profit. The fruits of labor, which should belong to the laborer as the most direct expression of their effort, become alien, foreign, and inaccessible. The worker is disconnected from what they create, unable to shape it according to their own needs or desires. A chair, a garment, a machine, or a meal, created with sweat and care, does not belong to the one who built it. It belongs to the owner of capital, to be exchanged in the marketplace for the profit of the few. This alienation transforms human creativity into a commodity, labor into a form of servitude, and human life into an instrument for sustaining inequality. Alienation extends beyond the products of labor to the relationships among people themselves. Capitalism thrives by dividing the workers, by setting them against each other in competition for wages, positions, and survival. The shared experience of exploitation, instead of forming bonds of solidarity, is obscured by rivalry and mistrust. The worker sees colleagues as competitors rather than allies, neighbors as threats rather than companions, and the social world as fragmented rather than cooperative. This separation is deliberate, a mechanism by which the ruling class ensures that the majority remain powerless, unable to unite and confront the structures of oppression. Humanity is made to feel isolated in the very processes that should connect us, and the capacity for collective action, the potential for revolutionary solidarity, is delayed, weakened, or suppressed. Most insidiously, alienation invades the worker's own sense of self. The laborer becomes estranged from their own humanity, reduced to an instrument for generating wealth that serves the interests of another. The joy of creation, the pride of accomplishment, and the exercise of intelligence and skill are transformed into duties measured by productivity and profitability. Work, which under free and communal conditions would be a source of satisfaction and social contribution, becomes a source of exhaustion, frustration, and alienation from one's own capacities. The worker is no longer master of their own activity, but subject to the imperatives of a system whose moral, social, and economic priorities are alien to their own. In this sense, the workers' very humanity is appropriated by capital, their potential stifled, and their individuality subordinated to the needs of profit. The condition is not accidental nor confined to one sector or region. It is systemic, inherent to the capitalist mode of production. The structures of ownership, hierarchy, and economic control ensure that the separation between labor and its product, between individuals, and between people and their own capacities is reproduced daily, generationally and historically. Alienation is maintained through both material arrangements and ideology. Education, media, culture, and law reinforce the legitimacy of private property and wage labor, teaching the worker to accept estrangement as natural and obedience as virtue. The worker internalizes these structures, accepting that their alienation is inevitable and the mechanisms of oppression perpetuate themselves. Yet, alienation is also a source of revolutionary potential. The recognition of separation, the awareness that one is deprived of the fruits of labor, estranged from others, and alienated from one's own capacities, contains within it the seed of collective consciousness. The worker, once awakened to the reality that exploitation is systemic and not a personal failure, can turn estrangement into unity, competition into solidarity, and oppression into struggle. The very mechanisms that enforce alienation also illuminate the path to liberation. For understanding the structures of separation allows the working class to identify the instruments of control, to organize collectively, and to reclaim not only the products of their labor but their humanity, their relationships, and their destiny. Class consciousness is essential. It is not merely awareness of personal hardship, nor is it the fleeting indignation that arises from individual injustice. It is the profound understanding that one's suffering is neither accidental nor isolated, but systemic, rooted in the structures of society that serve the interests of the ruling class. The worker who perceives late rent, scarce food, long hours, and crushing toil as personal. His fortune alone remains powerless. Only when these experiences are understood as the shared condition of an entire class, as the inevitable product of economic and political exploitation, does the potential for collective power awaken. Class consciousness is the lens through which the mechanisms of oppression become visible, the map that reveals the division between those who own and those who labor, and the compass that guides the struggle for liberation. Without it, the worker is blind to the forces shaping their life, and the chains of exploitation remain invisible, secure, and unchallenged. The capitalist system thrives upon ignorance, upon the fragmentation of awareness. It teaches the worker to see their condition as unique, as a consequence of personal failure or misfortune, rather than as the shared reality imposed upon a class whose labor generates wealth but whose ownership of that wealth is denied. Education, religion, media, and politics reinforce this misperception, presenting social hierarchy as natural, merit as the measure of success, and inequality as inevitable. The worker is trained to compete with others for survival, to see fellow laborers as rivals rather than comrades, to believe that obedience and compliance are virtues, and that questioning the established order is dangerous or futile. This manufactured ignorance ensures that the majority remain divided, powerless, and unaware of the latent strength that exists within their collective numbers. It is in this context that class consciousness emerges not as a luxury but as a necessity, the first step toward dismantling the structures of domination. Class consciousness is not instinctive. It is forged in struggle, in reflection, and in education. It grows when workers recognize that exploitation is systematic, when they see the same conditions repeated across factories, offices, farms, and streets. When the laborer understands that wage suppression, alienation, long hours, and lack of access to resources are not the result of random chance, but of deliberate economic arrangements, consciousness begins to awaken. This awareness transforms individual suffering into shared experience, fostering solidarity where before there was isolation. It is the recognition that one's fight is not solitary, but connected to millions of others, that one's liberation is intertwined with the liberation of all who labor under the same condition. Knowledge of shared oppression turns despair into understanding, understanding into strategy, and strategy into the potential for action. The significance of class consciousness lies not only in understanding oppression, but in its capacity to generate collective power. A single worker aware of exploitation is limited by circumstances, constrained by isolation, and vulnerable to the coercive forces of capital. But when workers collectively recognize their shared position within the economic hierarchy, the imbalance of power begins to shift. Numbers become leverage, unity becomes strategy, and the very structures designed to enforce compliance are exposed as vulnerable. Strikes, protests, unions, and revolutionary movements are expressions of class consciousness translated into action, demonstrating that the awareness of shared oppression is inseparable from the exercise of collective power. The conscious working class understands that social change is neither granted voluntarily nor achieved passively. It must be seized through organized, deliberate effort. Class consciousness also pierces the veil of ideology. The ruling class depends upon shaping thought, presenting inequality as natural, competition as virtuous, and hierarchy as inevitable. But when consciousness spreads, these illusions are stripped bare. Workers begin to see the state, the laws, the media, and the cultural norms not as impartial arbiters of justice, but as instruments of exploitation. The capitalist system, once perceived as immovable, appears instead as a human, construct, contingent, and therefore transformable. Awareness of shared oppression awakens not only the desire for change, but the comprehension of how change can be achieved through unity, collective struggle, and the reclamation of control over production, resources, and society itself. Without class consciousness, the potential for collective action remains dormant, scattered, and ineffective. Workers may endure suffering, express frustration, or rebel sporadically, but without understanding the systemic roots of oppression, their struggles are isolated and easily suppressed. Consciousness links personal grievance to social analysis, transforms scattered discontent into organized struggle, and ensures that the power inherent in numbers is directed towards strategic, revolutionary ends. In this sense, class consciousness is both shield and sword. It protects against the manipulation of ideology, clarifies the targets of struggle, and provides the foundation for collective power capable of reshaping society according to the needs and rights of the majority. Unity transforms history. History is not written by chance, nor is it the product of isolated acts of courage by individuals. It is shaped by the collective action of those who recognize their common condition and organize to change it. The forces of oppression, the systems of exploitation, and the structures of power are formidable, but they are not invincible. They rely upon the division, passivity, and disunity of those they dominate. Capitalism survives not only because of economic control, but because the workers remain fragmented, competing against each other, distracted by ideology, and unaware of the strength inherent in numbers. Only through the conscious unity of the oppressed can this system be challenged, weakened, and ultimately overturned. History favors not those who suffer quietly, but those who recognize that their fate is shared and act collectively to seize control of society. Collective action is the realization of class consciousness. Awareness of shared oppression by itself is insufficient to disrupt entrenched power. Knowledge must be transformed into strategy, and strategy must be executed through the coordinated effort of those whose labor sustains the entire social order. The worker alone is powerless to change the terms imposed by capital, to challenge wage slavery, to demand equitable distribution, or to confront the state apparatus that enforces property relations. The power of a single laborer is negligible when measured against armies, police forces, and capital accumulation. But the power of many, united in purpose and action, is monumental. When workers act together, they transform their numerical strength into leverage, their shared awareness into organized force, and their grievances into a structured movement capable of reshaping society. Unity converts latent potential into tangible power, capable of challenging the very foundations of exploitation. Historical revolutions and social transformations demonstrate this principle. No change has been granted by benevolent rulers or by appeals to morality alone. It has been seized through organized struggle. From the revolts of laborers in early industrial Europe to the mass movements that toppled tyrannies and restructured societies, history shows that the oppressed achieve liberation only when they recognize that solidarity amplifies their influence. Dispersed and disorganized, the working class is subjected to the whims of the owners of capital. Organized, however, they become an unstoppable force, capable of enforcing demands, redirecting resources, and reshaping political and economic structures. Strikes, protests, labor unions, and revolutionary councils are not random occurrences. They are expressions of collective power born of unity. The act of uniting does not merely resist oppression, it lays the groundwork for creating a society that reflects the interests of the many rather than the privileges of the few. Unity also dismantles the ideological barriers erected to maintain submission. The ruling class promotes division through competition, discrimination, and manufactured scarcity. Workers are pitted against each other along lines of race, gender, nationality, or skill, undermining solidarity and obscuring the fact that all laborers share a fundamental interest in challenging exploitation. Ideology teaches acceptance of hierarchy, rivalry as natural, and obedience as virtue. But when workers organize collectively, these artificial divisions are revealed for what they are: tools of domination designed to prevent the majority from asserting their power. Solidarity undermines these strategies, replacing suspicion with cooperation, rivalry with mutual support, and fragmentation with coordinated purpose. In unity, the workers learn that they are not isolated victims, but active agents of historical change. Collective organization transforms the experience of oppression into political and economic leverage. The unified laborer can demand better wages, safer conditions, and respect for dignity. They can influence legislation, disrupt markets, and challenge the accumulation of wealth by a few. Beyond immediate gains, unity lays the foundation for systemic transformation, for the redistribution of wealth and the democratization of production. The ability to act collectively is the instrument by which the working class can seize control of society's resources, direct economic activity toward human needs rather than profit, and restructure social relations to ensure equality, justice, and freedom. Without unity, these goals remain unattainable. Dispersed individuals may protest, express outrage, or resist passively, but without coordinated effort, their actions are easily suppressed, isolated, and rendered ineffective. Unity transforms not only outcomes, but consciousness itself. Through collective struggle, workers develop awareness of their power, strategic skills, and a shared vision for a different world. Solidarity fosters courage, discipline, and resilience, reinforcing the understanding that liberation is not a gift but an achievement, the product of organized and determined effort. When the oppressed act together, they no longer endure passively. They assert, they challenge, and they remake history in their image. The potential of the many becomes an unstoppable force, demonstrating that only through organized, collective action can systemic exploitation be confronted, dismantled, and replaced. Knowledge plus action equals liberation. To understand the structures of oppression is necessary, but understanding alone is insufficient. Awareness of economic domination, political control, and ideological manipulation is only the first step. Without action, knowledge remains inert, a mere observation of injustice rather than a force to overturn it. Comprehension of power reveals the mechanisms by which the ruling class maintains control, the ownership of the means of production, the concentration of wealth, the manipulation of law and ideology, and the division of labor to fragment solidarity. But recognizing these mechanisms does not alter them. Liberation requires the transformation of knowledge into mobilization, the conversion of insight into strategy, and the exercise of collective power to seize control of society and the wealth it generates. Without action, the worker remains trapped within the very system they understand, capable of critique, but unable to challenge the reality of exploitation. The ruling class relies upon this gap between understanding and action. Intellectual clarity without the will and organization to implement change is tolerated, even encouraged, because it does not threaten the structures of power. Workers may know they are exploited, that their labor enriches others while impoverishing themselves, that the social order is designed to perpetuate inequality, but if this knowledge is not mobilized, the system endures. History demonstrates that ruling classes maintain dominance through both the control of material resources and the manipulation of ideas. They educate, propagate ideology, and create norms that normalize hierarchy, competition, and subjugation. Knowledge that does not lead to collective, strategic action is neutralized, co-opted, or rendered harmless. Liberation demands that knowledge be weaponized, that comprehension become the engine of practical struggle, and that theory be inseparable from revolutionary practice. Mobilization requires organization, coordination, and solidarity. Individual recognition of oppression is powerless against the entrenched forces of the capitalist system. Only when individuals act together, aligned by a shared understanding of systemic exploitation, does the potential for meaningful change emerge. Workers who comprehend their oppression but remain isolated are like sparks, extinguished before they can ignite fire. Action transforms understanding into leverage, strikes, mass protests, labor unions, and revolutionary councils exemplify the translation of awareness into collective force capable of challenging the domination of the few. Through mobilization, workers assert their power, redirect social and economic processes, and create conditions in which the institutions of exploitation can be contested and ultimately dismantled. Knowledge without mobilization is observation. Knowledge with mobilization is revolution. The relationship between comprehension and action is dialectical. Understanding oppression sharpens strategy, allowing the working class to identify the vulnerabilities of the system, anticipate resistance, and organize effectively. Conversely, action deepens understanding, revealing the practical dynamics of power, the inertia of institutions, and the social mechanisms that ideology alone cannot fully explain. Through this interaction, knowledge and action reinforce each other, creating a feedback loop that amplifies the ability of the oppressed to seize control. The realization of liberation is therefore not an abstract ideal, but a concrete process in which theoretical clarity and practical struggle are inseparable, mutually reinforcing, and directed toward the overthrow of exploitation. The seizure of society and wealth requires both courage and discipline, guided by insight. Comprehending power allows the working class to recognize that wealth is not a natural inheritance of a few, but the product of collective labor, artificially concentrated and withheld. Action guided by this knowledge targets the very instruments of exploitation: factories, land, capital, and resources. Mobilization ensures that the redistribution of wealth is not symbolic or superficial, but rooted in the labor of those who create it, and that society is reorganized to reflect the needs, rights, and dignity of the many rather than the privileges of the few. Knowledge informs which structures to challenge, and action provides the force to alter them, ensuring that liberation is not granted but seized. History rewards those who act upon insight, who convert understanding into strategic mobilization. The oppressed who comprehend the mechanisms of power but fail to organize are consigned to continued subjugation, their awareness and unexploited potential. Those who unite knowledge with collective action disrupt entrenched hierarchies, challenge the accumulation of wealth by a few, and lay the foundation for a society built on equality, justice, and the reclamation of human labor and dignity. The synthesis of comprehension and mobilization transforms the possibility of liberation into reality, demonstrating that awareness alone is insufficient, organization alone is incomplete, And only the combination of knowledge and decisive action can overthrow oppression, redistribute wealth, and restructure society in accordance with the collective interest of the working class. Comrades, the truth is now clear. The structures of society, the domination of the few over the many, and the exploitation of labor are neither natural nor eternal. Power is deliberately structured, designed to concentrate wealth, enforce obedience, and obscure the reality of oppression. Workers are alienated from the products of their labor, from one another, and from their own humanity, their creativity and dignity, stolen to enrich a minority. Yet in this very alienation lies the seed of awakening, for recognition of injustice is the first step toward collective empowerment. Class consciousness transforms individual suffering into shared understanding, revealing that your struggle is not solitary, that your oppression is systemic, and that your liberation depends upon unity, organization, and strategy. Unity is the instrument by which history itself can be bent to the will of the oppressed. Only through coordinated, collective action does the power of the working class become visible, tangible, and unstoppable. Division is the tool of the oppressor, solidarity is the weapon of the worker, and organized action is the path from despair to victory. Knowledge without action is powerless. Action without comprehension is aimless. The fusion of insight and mobilization is what turns awareness into liberation, theory into revolution, and numbers into unstoppable force. It is the working class, armed with understanding and united in purpose, that has the capacity to seize the instruments of production, reclaim the wealth they have created, and reconstruct society in accordance with justice, equality, and human dignity. History does not favor the passive, the submissive, or the ignorant. It favors those who understand power, those who recognize their oppression, and those who act collectively to change their conditions. Comrades, the hour of awakening is upon us. The structures of exploitation can be dismantled, the chains of alienation can be broken, and the world can be remade by those who labor, by those who know, and by those who unite. The struggle is not easy, and the path is neither comfortable nor assured, but it is necessary, it is just, and it is inevitable if we refuse to accept the authority of the few over the many. Seize knowledge, forge unity, act with courage, and reclaim your labor, your dignity, and your destiny. The future belongs to those who understand power, and it will be shaped by those who dare to seize it.